finally getting around to doing it now, and I'm going to start with one of the best movements, the deadlift. So the deadlift is such an amazing movement because it is such a compound lift and it can really help to strengthen your entire body. It is also a very technical movement though and requires a lot of attention to detail. I do teach all my clients how to do a proper deadlift because I do believe that once you learn how to do a really good deadlift, this movement pattern and these techniques really do transition over into other parts of your training. You can also implement deadlifting into any type of training, regardless of your goal, whether that be weight loss, strength training, or wanting to build muscle as well. If you're a beginner to training though, it is such a daunting movement, and getting set up with the movement in the gym and being able to practice the technique on your own can be really tough. So I'm going to break down the deadlift for you from the very beginning for beginners only today. So we're starting for those of you who are just new to the gym or just getting into training or strength training and lifting, and you want to learn how to do a conventional deadlift. So there's a few key points to keep in mind when you're learning how to deadlift. And the first one is what plates to use on your deadlift bar. So you'll find that when you go into some gyms, you might find normal plates, regular plates like this one. So this is a 5 kilo weight plate, okay? Now the weights we want to use for deadlifting are called bumper plates. So these are the bigger plates like this one. So both of these weights are 5 kilos. They both weigh exactly the same. As you can see, this one is a lot bigger. So these are the plates that you want to be using when you're learning how to deadlift. And the reason for this is if you put these plates on the end of the bar, it's going to lift the bar up to the correct height. So the bar is going to be sitting higher off the ground. If you use one of the smaller plates like this, the bar is going to be very close to the ground. So effectively you are actually doing a deficit deadlift, which is actually quite an advanced movement. So you definitely want to be deadlifting with a regular bumper plate to start off with, so that your bar is nice and high off the ground. Now if your gym doesn't have bumper plates and you want to learn how to deadlift, then my advice would be to elevate your bar on some steps like I will show you in the coming videos, or you can alternatively do it off a rack as well. Okay, the second thing I want to chat to you about is your shoes. So most of you probably have a pair of Nikes or something pretty comfortable like this, which is great for your cardio, getting around, any other style of circuit training, but I do prefer to train my weights in my Converse or flat soled shoes. And there's a couple of reasons why it's better to have a flat feet when you are learning to deadlift. So if you don't have a pair of Converse or flat shoes, you can just take your shoes off and do it in your socks as well if your gym allows you to. So one of the biggest tips with your deadlift is to make sure that you're sitting back into the heels of your feet and not falling forward into the toes of your feet when you're deadlifting. And having a heel on your shoe like this can make that very, very difficult, which is why it's so much easier to do it with your feet flat to the ground. You can really sit back into the heels and you're not tempted to drop the weight forward. Having a heel in your foot does change the way that you stand. So really, you're going to have to elevate and then your body will correct itself to sort of compensate for that heel under your foot. When you do your strength training, it is better to have that stability and flat foot to the ground so that you can sit back into the heels for some of your exercises. Shoes that are great for running and impact are quite flexible and spongy as well, so you will not feel as stable to the ground, and that is something that you really want when you're learning to lift heavier weights or trying to find that stability in your training when you're working on your technique. So this is why I choose to train in flat shoes or Converse. So the very first step or the first exercise that I want you to learn is the kettlebell deadlift. So we're using one kettlebell and I've just got 2 weight plates propping it up so it's a little bit higher off the ground. So elevating the kettlebell off the ground to start off will reduce the range of motion, which really helps for beginners. Just really makes it easier to get into that deadlifting position, especially if you've got any lack of mobility or tightness. So rather than a squat, it's actually a strong hip hinge movement. So you can see my hips are pushing back as I come down and my knees and shins are staying pretty much vertical to the ground. So the knees don't drop forward very much. It's more of the hips pushing back. You can see from the front view that my feet are just inside shoulder width apart. So some of the key basic tips to remember is that your shoulders must always stay higher than your hips when you're down at the bottom of that deadlift position. Shins almost stay vertical to the ground, and it's a hip hinge movement. So you're pushing the hips back while keeping a neutral spine all the way to the top of your head. Once you've nailed the elevated kettlebell deadlift, you can then do a normal one off the floor. So everything stays exactly the same. You're just increasing that range of motion a little, so you'll feel a little bit more pull through the hamstrings and maybe the lower back as you try and match that position with a larger range of motion. If you're training on your own, you can always set your phone down and film from side on so that you can just double check your technique.
Step number 2 will be our conventional deadlift with an elevation. So it means you're going to elevate the bar off the ground.
So a great way to set yourself up is to walk all the way up to the bar, feet about hip width or a little wider. You want to grip the bar with your hands outside the legs. When you bend down to grip the bar, you want to do this without letting the bar roll forward. If the bar rolls forward, it means that you're dropping your shins and your knees forward as you bend. So instead, to avoid this, you want to hip hinge instead. So you're pushing the hips back, coming down, grabbing the bar, and the shins are staying almost vertical to the ground. Again, key tips, you always want your shoulders to be higher than your hips, a neutral spine all the way to the top of your head, which means you want to tuck the chin just a little as you come down into that bottom position. And when you get to the top of the deadlift, you want to make sure your glutes are squeezing on tight and that your shoulders are back and down. And of course, you should be in a nice neutral position. So try not to push the hips forward too far or arch through the lower back.
And step number 3 is going into your normal conventional deadlift off the ground.
So once you've nailed those few key tips on your elevated deadlift, you're now ready to bring the bar down to the ground and you're going to do a full conventional deadlift. So all the same rules apply here. When you're lifting the bar off the ground, try to pull the shoulders down and really activate through your lats and your traps first, and then think of pulling with the shoulders first. When you lift, as you want to create a nice simultaneous movement. Often we can be tempted to lift the hips and the bum first, rather than moving everything together as one movement. Notice from the front view as well that when I come down, I've got contact between my knees and my arms there in the bottom position. So you want to be pushing the knees out slightly, activating through the glutes as you lift.
Learn the basic principles of how to do a conventional deadlift. Once you've mastered these 3 tips, you're ready for part 2, which will be my next video on mastering your conventional deadlift technique. And this is where we're going to go into all the nitty-gritty detail about how to perfect your deadlift form. If you have any questions about this video, please pop them in the comments box and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, stay tuned for part 2 of this video. Thank you for watching. Mwah!